I love this panel. When I invited them to come and do this, I sent out an email and I got responses, 1 in 3 minutes. You get the prize for that. Then 1 in 5 and 1 in 7 minutes. In under 10 minutes, our Orange County responses to the juvenile justice issues around commercial sexual exploitation of children. They were ready to step up and educate us and bring us all onto the same page. So I'm going to introduce them all at once to save time. The first is the Honorable Douglas Hachimonji, who was appointed to the Superior Court of California in October 2003. He has primarily presided over juvenile justice, child abuse and neglect, and adult criminal proceedings. He was a supervising judge of the Orange County Superior Court North Justice Center from January 2006 to 2009. He was presiding judge of juvenile court from January 2011 to January 2014, and supervising judge of Harbor Justice Center from January 2014 to 16, and currently presides over juvenile justice matters at Orange County's Lamoureux Justice Center. He has taught on a variety of juvenile, criminal, and judicial leadership and administrative topics, including the Center for Judicial Education and Research, the Center for Family, Children and Courts, Vanguard University, the University of California Irvine School of Law, Cal State University Sacramento, and the American Judges Association. He is an appointed member of the California Child Welfare Council, the Judicial Council, and Juvenile Law Advisory Committee, and is chair. Are you exhausted yet? Of the Center for Judicial Education and Research Juvenile Law Curriculum Committee. Welcome, Your Honor. The Honorable, yes, let's do that. The Honorable Maria Hernandez is a felony trial panel judge for Superior Court of Orange County. She was presiding judge of the juvenile court from 2014 to 2018. Prior to her appointment as the juvenile court presiding judge, she was responsible for both dependency and delinquency inventories, presided over juvenile drug court, dependency drug court, and boys court program, and chaired the task force relating to commercial sexually exploited children. Judge Hernandez has been assigned to juvenile court since 2010, and prior to that served at the West Justice Center presiding over adult criminal matters. She worked as a senior deputy public defender, as a trial lawyer until she was appointed to the bench as a commissioner in 2006, and appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger as a judge in 2009. She is a University of California Irvine alum. Go Anteaters. Having graduated from her undergraduate degree from UCI in 1986 and law degree from Western State University, Fullerton. Thank you for being here. And finally, the Honorable Joanne Motegi, presiding judge of juvenile court, was appointed in December 2018. Prior to her appointment, she was responsible for juvenile justice inventories, teen court, and has previously served at the West Justice Center, where she presided over adult criminal matters. She worked as a senior deputy public defender at the OC Public Defender's Office from 2008 until she was appointed by Governor Brown as judge in 2013. She was a trial attorney at the United Nations Office of the Prosecutor, International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia from 2006 to 2008, and a deputy public defender at the OC Public Defender's Office from 94 to 2006. As the presiding juvenile court judge, Judge Motegi handles cases involving commercially sexually exploited children, presiding over the teen court program, and works with juvenile justice partners in the daily administration of the juvenile court. Thank you. Each of the judges are going to tell their part of the story here in Orange County, and then we will open it for questions using Slido.
Good morning. So, I think most of the people in this room know that you can't really say no to Sandy Morgan. So when I got the email, it was sort of inevitable. I've known her long enough now just to go, well, okay, yeah. Then I was told what I'm supposed to talk about today, which was the pre-Grace Court development of the juvenile court's trafficking response. And if I knew when I said yes that that's what she wanted me to talk about, I might have said no. And the reason is this, and sorry, Sandy, but I don't really remember that much. And I'm serious. I kind of felt bad about that. I was thinking about the fact, I kind of racked my mind. The slideshow this morning was awesome because it was the first time that I had a chance to refresh my recollection about, for me, the ancient past. But I realized, or I thought, that in my amnesia, I think that there's a lesson to be told, and I'll get to that in just a moment. The first thing to understand is I was the presiding judge of juvenile court in Orange County from 2011 to 2014. Judge Maria Hernandez succeeded me in that position, and Judge Motegi followed Judge Hernandez in the position of the presiding judge of juvenile court in Orange County. Let me talk to you a little bit about what that means, because part of it is why I don't remember a lot about the early days. The presiding judge of juvenile court in all of our counties in California is responsible for pretty much overseeing all of juvenile justice that happens in the county. It means that we are responsible for the child welfare cases that come into the court, the children who have experienced abuse and neglect in their lives. We are responsible for overseeing the juvenile justice or the juvenile delinquency cases, that is, children, youth who have committed crimes, everything from truancy to murder. Part and parcel of that responsibility means that we supervise in this county 10 judges who are responsible for the day-to-day case management of those cases. It means that we see that they are managing their caseload, handling their caseload, addressing the cases in the appropriate manner, ensuring that they are ethically complying with their responsibilities. We're responsible for oversight and working with court administration in their establishment and development of policies and procedures that increase access to justice for the public. We work with, on a regular basis, all of the major agencies in the county that touch on the lives of our children. So the Department of Education, whereas Dr. Mijares, our Orange County Social Service Agency, our Child Welfare Agency, the Orange County Probation Department, our Behavioral Health Agency. We are responsible for understanding, knowing, developing resources and services for at-risk children in the county. We work day in and day out with community-based organizations, non-governmental organizations that are looking to improve the lives of at-risk children and families. We look to improve the access to justice and juvenile justice up and down the counties. It is a job that has a lot of meetings. And that's relevant to my story for this reason. I do recollect sometime in late 2011, a meeting showed up on my calendar. I don't know who put it there. I don't know how it got there. I'm not even sure I even know what it was about. I don't remember the meeting very well. I don't remember who was really there. Derek Marsh might have been there. It was just at the juvenile court. Derek Marsh might have been there. I'm not entirely sure about that. But the one thing I remember about this meeting was it was the very first time in my life that I heard the phrase modern day slavery. And what was interesting to me, and you saw it evidenced on Derek and Sandy's slideshow earlier, that phrase was not taught to me by a victim advocate or a social worker or an educator. That phrase was taught to me by a police officer. I think it was Craig Friesen at Anaheim PD. And that phrase I remember to this day because it resonated. It didn't work.
Here you go.
It resonated with me, man, like a bell. But see, this was back in the day when children were still being arrested and prosecuted for violations of Penal Code Section 647B, prostitution. I remember going to a meeting at Anaheim PD where I think Sergeant Friesen invited a lot of police agencies in Orange County, and it was in this big amphitheater room. Very few, if anybody, showed up because there was this huge cultural divide that had to be dealt with. This was back in the early days. Nevertheless, we began this process of learning about what Csec is. I remember reading Girls Like Us and Pimpology. It was important for the judiciary to begin their education. I was at a conference up in San Francisco on domestic violence. And a woman, Bobby Welling, who worked back in the day for the Judicial Council, came up to me during a break in this domestic violence conference and said, "Do you know anything about human trafficking?" And I said, "About this much." And she goes, "Well, that's more than most people know." And she recruited me with a number of other judges and individuals to develop the first curriculum for training judges in juvenile and criminal court on Csec. I remember attending an early version of this conference. It was in one of those little classrooms over there. And that's the first time that I realized that there was this community. We had people from San Bernardino County and Riverside. I remembered meeting Judge Bill Voy from Las Vegas. I think him and I were the only judicial officers that were present at this meeting. But that's really kind of all that I remember. And as I said, I think that there's a lesson in my amnesia. You see, notwithstanding, despite the fact that Csec is as important an issue as it is, that everybody in this room knows it is, how crucial, critical, and heartbreaking Csec is. For me, as the juvenile court presiding judge in Orange County, it was just another one of the things that I had to deal with. It was just another thing. I had meetings after meetings. I am concerned about and thinking about changing the trajectory of the lives of all at-risk children in Orange County, improving the lives of abused and neglected children, changing the trajectory of the lives of children who violated the law. And trafficking was just one more thing, which is part of the reason I don't remember that much. But in that sense, as a juvenile court presiding judge, I'm no different than many people who work in government, whether it's a governor, a state senator, an assembly person, a member of a board of supervisors, police chief. We are all alike in the sense that we've got a plate full of things, a lot of stuff going on. One meeting is trafficking, I leave that meeting and I walk into a budget meeting, right? So the critical thing, the thing to understand is this. It's important for individuals like yourself to get on their radar screen, stay on their radar screen, make sure that government people like I was remain constantly aware and educated on the issues involving Csec. So how do you do that? Well, what you need is a Sandy Morgan. Now, Sandy is, as you all know, tremendously experienced, really knowledgeable, passionate about this topic. But in that sense, I think just about everybody in the room is experienced, knowledgeable, and passionate about this topic. Sandy is something else beyond that, though, that most of us do not have. Sandy Morgan is a connector. And for some of you that know, connector is a word, is a term coined by Malcolm Gladwell. And Malcolm Gladwell tells us that connectors are people that have a special gift for bringing the world together. And the deal is this. The way that you get on and stay on and educate people like juvenile court presiding judges is to build a community. This room is evidence of the power of a connector, right? And once a connector brings this kind of community together, you have people who are networking, integrated, and collaborative. And with that community, networking, integrated, and collaborative, you have the vehicle to make sure that people like me get the message so that we remember. I don't know, I don't have a lot of memory as to how I got here, but I do know positively I got here because of a connector. Good luck.
Rebel against Judge Hachimanji and sit here and talk to you from here, both because we don't like to stand up in heels and fidget in front of the front room like that. So let me follow up with some of Doug's comments about Sandy, first of all, because I do remember things, as in, it would be Doug's fault is the theme of my 15 minutes. Doug's fault in a good way, because in about 2010 or 11, Doug introduced me to Sandy, and I remember that specifically on this campus. I think it was in your office or in the other older building. And I remember saying, I'm never going to be able to say no to this woman ever. Which all of you who've met Sandy know that to be the case in a very good way. And to follow up on many of Doug's comments is that is an obligation everyone in this room has, which is once you have the knowledge, you have the power to convene. You have the ability to spread this information and make sure the institutionalized history for government folks or non-government folks maintains. not just maintains and sustains, but builds, because this is truly a movement. And the collaboration, and to Doug's points about everyone in this room and that we collectively work together, where we came from as a court system, Doug started that here in Orange County. We have colleagues in the state of California, and I'm going to recognize them right now. Some of you will know them. Judge Catherine Pratt from Los Angeles County, Judge Stacy Bulriuri from Sacramento County are probably two of the most recognized judicial officers, not just here in California, but in the United States, as experts on how to do this work from our perspectives in the court system, and dedicating courts to anti-human trafficking efforts, focusing on our Csec, which is where I'm going to move into. Doug started it. His fault. So just remind him of that when you see him. It's your fault, Doug. Doug's fault in a good way, and he did. He introduced me to Sandy, and the passion and the knowledge of Dr. Sandy Morgan is a force to be reckoned with, and such a blessing to be a part of. So with that, she has connected me to, I can't even begin to tell you the hundreds, if not thousands of people and organizations to be able to address the work we need to do. And jumping a little bit onto the judicial obligations that we have, especially as juvenile judges, it moves and it's different when you sit in a different assignment. And I moved to a criminal assignment, an adult assignment, so I don't have the ability, because of some of our canon of ethics, to do some of the things that we are obligated and honored to do as juvenile judges. But that's where I want to tell each and every one of you, no matter what lane you're in, you have this wealth of information, this knowledge. It is your responsibility to make sure you continue with it in the appropriate method and way that you can within your respective roles. So when Doug handed the torch off to me, I guess that's the nice way to say it's his fault. What we decided and what we were seeing is the identification and the education awareness piece was getting much larger. We were now connecting with our task force in Orange County, and I see so many friendly faces. And I remember specifically with Sergeant Ravalis, training with him and Nicole and some of those folks up and down the state. And I remember when Sergeant Ravalis would tell a story and out himself about, as a gang investigator, detective for many years, not realizing these victims that he was seeing, and a particular victim in a story he would tell. I have the same story, you guys. I was a public defender in juvenile court, and to the point that Doug just shared with you, we were arresting and prosecuting children when I was in juvenile court as a lawyer. And what I would say was, I would go to that judge and say, this is not right. This child can't have sex willingly, voluntarily, and legally. But I didn't have the ability to know, what about that trafficker and that exploiter out there that was doing that to the child? And what was I going to do with my child client? I was more concerned with, this is just not right, and didn't understand the premise behind it. Then let me out myself a little farther. We talked a little bit about Johns. When I first came to the bench, the first place they'll plop a new judge ordinarily is an arraignment calendar, and in would come the John sweeps. You guys know what I talk about when I talk about John sweeps? Hands up out there? Yes. They would all come in for arraignment, not identifying what was truly happening in front of me. It was just like rote, let me just go through and give them their, go to your John school, get your AIDS testing, and be gone and don't come back to my courtroom. I am embarrassed and ashamed of the things that I was just not knowledgeable about in those early years. But to my point is that when we do learn, with that comes a responsibility to take care and make sure that you continue making sure that you are educating folks. So working together collectively in the juvenile court, Doug's told you a lot about what we do and our responsibilities. I won't give you the juvenile justice history in 1899 and back in Chicago, but let me just share with you, juvenile court is the first collaborative court ever, and it is the strongest collaborative court because by its nature and its existence, we need and must collaborate and collectively work together with numerous stakeholders. So all of you who are with our stakeholders that we convene with, whether it's the usual suspects that I call, our Department of Education who we partner with, our county social services, behavioral mental health, the laundry list goes on of all of those parties of which you folks represent, all of our nonprofits, our NGOs. We don't do this without you. And coming from a background where I worked in collaborative courts for many years as a lawyer back into the early 90s, as a judge once I hit the bench in the early 2000s, I knew that's how we can actually accomplish and do some really good work. And so when Doug left me and abandoned me at juvenile court, it's his fault. Yes, I had created a boys' court, which Sandy and I talked a lot about, which was our high-risk, highest needs youth in the system, boys, when people said, yeah, you can't do that. The numbers are going to be horrible. The cost benefit is not going to be there. I did a lot of research across the country, and nobody wanted to support bringing in and having collaborative interventions with the highest risk boys in the system, in our child welfare and juvenile justice system. So we created a boys' court, and it's still going. And I'll let Judge Motegi talk more about that. Joanne has run that court now, and she, as you heard from Doug, took up where I left off. So it was really kind of a natural idea for me when I saw what Doug was talking about, and he connected me to Sandy, was, look, we need to convene a court that will be dedicated to address the needs of our high-risk youth who need services and partnerships and collective bodies to work together. Then I was working with Judge Pratt and Judge Bulriari up and down the state. Judge Pratt, I think, created the first, if I'm correct, Doug, the very first court. It's called Star Court out of Los Angeles County. She, like Sandy, is probably in Washington, D.C. as much as she's here on the West Coast, because she and Judge Bulriari are over the country talking about their respective programs. So I can't tell you that I did create this like my brainchild. Oh no, remember that. You don't need to recreate the wheel. You've got a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge. What you need to do is make sure that you institutionalize, memorialize that knowledge, what you're doing, those protocols, what works, what doesn't work. Because you're also going to find, hey, we reached out, we did some of this, and guess what? The data shows us that there's not a lot of efficacy there. So we need to be mindful. I mean, we'd love to have all the resources in the world, wouldn't we all? But we also have some strict fiscal limitations, all of us, whether you're Department of Ed, social services, the court system, whomever. So we have to get the biggest bang for the buck. So you have to be mindful of also reassessing the work that you're doing so that you're doing the work that is making the most difference with those limited resources. Don't be afraid to have the hard conversations. When people say no, that door is shut, you just keep knocking at that door until somebody lets you in. It's persistence. We are connectors. We are conveners. And if you give up, so goes the movement. And likewise, when Doug was talking about modern day slavery, that was the first I had heard of it as well. And then we continue to connect with these people who have so much knowledge with our task force. And I learn every single time. And most importantly, who do you think you need to listen to first and foremost? How about your survivors? How about your survivor advocates? And I know there's a few of them in the room here, and that was the one piece of information that often, even as, certainly as judges, we want to make procedures. We want to do things for our children and our families. We want to create. You need to have the voice of that young person at the table or the adult in our human trafficking issues. Their voice has to be at the table and be heard. Because without that, you're starting to make policy and protocol and procedure without really having the narrative of those who have walked in those shoes and having the relationship. I learned early on about relationships, and it just takes one relationship. In talking with so many of our survivors, each and every time I learn something from them. I have been so blessed by the knowledge, the education, and just watching the courageousness of some of these young people who I have and still have connections with. And I shared just a little side note, because I don't know, and if we talk about the man upstairs doing some things, I hadn't heard from a particular or about one of my particular past survivors who is a force to be reckoned with, and up pops a picture of her beautiful little baby who's a year and a half. And she is just excelling. She and mom are doing fabulous. Another one of my fabulous survivors who's just so courageous, who's in this room this morning, and I got to see her and hug her and know that, hey, you know what? Sometimes we just plant seeds. Remember that. That's where we were at. And when I turn it over to Joanne, that's where I was at. Doug's fault. He brought it to me. I created and dedicated an assigned court, our Grace Court. Like Doug, I don't remember some of the details of how did we go there? How did we get there to me creating the court? Well, I can tell you that when he abandoned me, he also left me with a few children that were assigned to my court that he'd identified. And he recognized we need to bring them in separately and have the voice of the Department of Ed, Social Services, Probation, everybody around the table, and have these types of conversations. And when he abandoned me, he left me with a couple young ladies. He doesn't like the word abandoned, but it was an abandonment. He left me with a couple young ladies, and I can remember one of them, Haley. And we were working together with our HEAT unit, which is our prosecution unit here in Orange County, the vertical unit, of which one of our lovely prosecutors, who, by the way, is no longer with that unit, but here today, to show you, continue do what you're doing, even when you go outside of your lane and outside of this assigned position, because it makes a difference. Having the prosecutors at the table with the counsel for the minors, if they're involved in juvenile justice or otherwise, or in our child welfare side. Those 2 or 3 bloomed into about 15 in about a year. Then our child welfare started keeping really good data of how many were being involved in the child welfare system and the trafficking reports that were coming out from the task force. And we were seeing just astronomical numbers grow. Needless to say, my little dedicated court of 3 or 4 that Doug left me with bloomed into about 20 pretty quickly. And we knew I couldn't just keep stamping on our files. This is before we went paperless. I didn't want human trafficking written on the outside of these paper files, because as we all know, language is so important in this world. Like, this can't be. Not even anti-human trafficking. That doesn't work either. And again, I borrowed from, and I remember the moment, couldn't tell you what month or day it was, but I was on my way to many trips in Sacramento from all those meetings Doug shared with you. And I just remembered we needed to have something that was strong and really symbolized what these young people were about and the courage that they have. And so Grace came to mind. And then I had to figure out what those words were going to mean in an acronym. And so we created that, and then Joanne took that and changed that a little bit. But bottom line is, that is how our Grace Court came to be, and the dedication of all of the members that are a part of it. I can honestly say, and I know all of you, in working with our task force people, especially, Juan, Sergeant Rivales, I really love you and miss you. Not missing the 2 a.m. phone calls or the text messages all through the weekend, which that's what you do. When you are in it, in this work, you are in it, and it's not 9 to 5. We would have multiple phones, and that is the beauty, is the connection, back to the connection, is that we were able, with the task force, with the HEAT unit, with the counsel for the children, to make sure we had phone calls, text messages going pretty much all nights and in the weekends. And, Sergeant Rivales, can you roll out? I think we know where she's at, or he would let us know that. And then we would let everybody know, so we didn't have ex-party issues, because we were all working on that same page. So the reality is that's where you go from here, ladies and gentlemen, is whether you stay in the very units that you're working, vertical units, myself as leaving juvenile court, now I'm back in the adult side. There's a lot of work and awareness and training that needs to be done in my world with my colleagues to understand where we come from. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Miss Joanne and let her tell you where we're going.
So I can actually use abandon.
Yes.
When we talk about abandonment, You abandoned me. And,
It's the theme.
you know, at least Doug came back. You abandoned me. Are we
I'll
calling
be
it?
back.
Are
I'll
we?
be back.
And we're calling it passing the torch, as
Yeah.
opposed to, hey, can you step in for me and take on this because I need to go do some other things in my life. Yeah. So I'll call it passing the torch. But as I sit here, I think that it's kind of, and I know it's obvious to everybody, but you could see how a connection started, then a discussion. And it took a community to engage in that discussion, then to actually mobilize all of the stakeholders involved in juvenile court to identify our Csec population and then get them into a specialized court. So what I'm basically doing right now is kind of just sitting in a court that exists because of this initial connection and because of this initial movement and discussions and collaboration with not only the bench, but with law enforcement and all of our community partners, because that was a heavy lift that started with Doug, and then Maria, you took on. And you didn't have to reinvent the wheel, but you had to do it in Orange County, and you had to get the buy-in from all of our community partners and the support of everybody to do it. And I am lucky because I am just walking into a courtroom that already exists. I'm not saying that we stop here, because it's obvious from everybody being here and the discussions that are going to go on today and tomorrow about how much more work we need to do. But I think that evidence, this itself is evidence of the momentum and what everybody can do, like Sandy says, what we can accomplish if we come together with the knowledge and information and start then taking it back to our own communities, our own governments, and trying to implement changes to address this very vulnerable population that, as we know from the history we've heard, has been very much ignored previously. So I'm supposed to talk about what Grace Court looks like today. And I think there's a lot of people here who are actually part of our Grace Court team, and I call it a team. We are always that person's team, and that's what's very important for us in the courtroom itself. I don't know how familiar you all are with what Grace Court does, and that is that we take juvenile justice cases, we take which are delinquency cases, we take victims who have been identified through the child welfare system. We take both populations if they're both involved in both child welfare and the delinquency or juvenile justice side. We take youth who are involved in both sides. And we bring everybody who is involved in that particular victim's life to the table. And we sit and talk about anything that each participant wants to talk about, anything that's going on, any support or services that we could to provide to that particular youth who is before us. And sometimes it's just, hanging out and talking. And slowly we've added new partners to our team. Orangewood Project Choice, they have recently come. They've been actually coming for a long time now, but it feels like it's fairly new. And we actually added Baxter, thanks to the Human Trafficking Task Force. They presented us with a dog with social services agencies' help. And Baxter, our German Shepherd, is beloved. And he is a member of our team that is just as important as any of our human members. So we basically convene every Wednesday, and we just, if our victims want to come in, they come in. They don't have to come in. But the biggest part of our discussion is what he or she needs. And his or her voice is the most important part of that team discussion. And then all of the case specifics and everything are kind of just like they're in the background, because what we're looking at is providing the support, wrapping that victim with the services so that we can hopefully break the cycle. And we couldn't do that without all of our collaborative partners, our human trafficking task force, law enforcement, the DA's office, Minors Council, Parents Council, healthcare agency, social services agency, the Department of Education, all of our community-based organizations that also come out to help, Orangewood Foundation, Waymakers. We are a big team, but we are there to support and provide the services for our victims. As far as the future of where Grace Court will go, we now, after I took over for Maria, because she left me with not 5, but I think about 37 participants in our program. which we continue to maintain on an annual basis. And, the court will continue to exist, but we are just the court. There are a lot of things that as a community I think we can work to develop and improve, even more so for our victims. I continue, and I know Maria and Doug also continued to fight for funding for our attorneys who represent our victims and our families in these processes, because we rely heavily on the legislature to provide that money and funding for that appointed counsel. So it's a continuous battle to try and get the recognition that we need these legal services for our youth and families. And so that's a continuous battle. Also, we are struggling with placement. As all of you, I think, are aware, placement is a difficult thing to come by across the state, across the nation, for any of our system-involved youth. But when we're talking about our Csec population, we need specialized homes for our victims. And in Orange County, it's a continuous struggle to try and find appropriate placements. So there are a lot of things that we will continue to do. And that's why I kind of go back to what Doug initially started with, and that is the conversations need to go on. They need to go on with our city, county, all of our local officials, then in Sacramento, our national, our state-wide officials, because they need to make sure, we need to make sure that it's always on the top of their agenda. Because as Doug pointed out, yeah, there's a lot of things going on. They've got a lot of other things to take care of, but we need to make sure that that is one of the topics on top of their agendas so that we can get some of the work done on a state and national level. I think that's pretty much it as far as our future for Grace Court.
All right. If you're a counselor, would you please raise your hand right now? If you're a marriage and family, clinical psych, any kind of counselor, raise your hand. I just want my friends with abandonment issues to know who to talk to.
It's an ongoing thing.
And I have never abandoned any of you. Okay, we're going to move to Slido questions right now. I am so encouraged by this ongoing story, and I keep wanting to interject because tomorrow at 2 o'clock I get to tell you what I think the future means for us. So, one of the first questions is, what type of home facility is best for victims, and how long would they be at the home? Who wants to start that?
Well, we have found that foster family homes make the best placements, but we also need foster family homes who have the specialized trauma-informed training, and that's what's been difficult to come by.
Add to that. Try to add to that.
Try this one. Wait a minute. Is this one on? Which one?
This one, oh, it
There
works.
you go.
Yeah, I agree with that. The foster family that is trained in the particular issues for this population. It goes without saying that all of these victims have a significant trauma history. But the truth of the matter is, virtually all of our children in the child welfare system have adverse childhood experiences that are off the charts. But one of the things that happens with many foster placements is the foster parent doesn't give the child a second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth chance to return back to the home after they've run or they've had an episode of, busting up some furniture. And it just perpetuates that, abandonment issue that we discussed earlier. So,
Any other responses? All right. During Sting, and if you see a question that you like, if you click on like, it moves it to the top. It's just like social media, amazing. Okay, during sting operations, buyers and traffickers are arrested. However, there is only a few who actually receive charges. Why? Is it the choice of the DA?
Well, as I see Madam Prosecutor over here, and I see my law enforcement partners over there, what does happen is the call for services as law enforcement rolls out, the training that has been going on across the state, and I will tell you, we have one of the gold standard units. Ms. Oliver's here from that unit at this point. With the task force and the leadership of Sergeant Rivales, they communicate a lot with those law enforcement officers here in Orange County, and I'm just speaking to Orange County, to get that victim-centered approach and to understand where are they going, how to educate officers in the field, how to not only deal with your victims, but to that point, the question of what are we going to do with the perpetrators and what are we going to charge them with? I would imagine a lot of training goes on, and specific training, Ms. Oliver, with prosecutors on what charges to file. Remember, they have proof issues that they always have to address, and whether they can prove their cases beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law, which then comes to us, where I actually sit now in the adult side. So I get the frustrations on saying, gosh, what's happening with the prosecution? Especially, and I know this is one of Sandy's big issues, is on the demand side as well. What are we doing on the demand side to the John sweep that I outed myself on? And I think we are moving in the right direction. Again, I know the task force has focused on that and addressing that. But as to the three equal branches of government, the district attorney's office will be your charging folks who will decide what charges to actually file.
This question is getting so many votes. It's top here. What happens when the juveniles age out? What plans and services are provided? And before you answer, I just have to tell you of a heroic moment of our task force and when the Honorable Maria Hernandez was presiding, recovered a girl who was 17 and 364 days old. Maria, what did you do?
Nicole's in the room too somewhere.
Yeah, there she is.
Nicole, you remember this one? Because of the connections, because ordinarily what would take 48 hours perhaps to get a petition filed, to get that child, that minor into the system, and then another 48 hours, particularly maybe to get them into the courtroom for a detention hearing. Because we were all on a text message link with Minors Counsel. I appointed Minors Counsel via the telephone. She immediately went over to the Orangewood shelter and spoke with the young person who was going to turn 18 in a day or so, maybe a day and a half, whatever it was. Because again, law enforcement had triggered immediately, let social services know. They roll out on these calls. Immediately, phone call goes to our prosecutor, to our county counsel, who's also involved in it. And we actually had a petition, I shouldn't repeat this, because they stayed up all night and drafted a petition so that a petition could be filed and we could have her in my courtroom the very next day. That's how it happened.
Pick it up with your new tape.
Try it. Oh.
So
Yeah.
Doug, who didn't abandon me, where's my therapist? I didn't abandon you. We didn't abandon each other. See, we still obviously stay very closely connected, so I recognize you all know that's a joke. But there is issues with aging out, and what do we do when a youth then even ages out of the AB 12, goes beyond those 21 years, right? And where's the system, where's that catch? And what we recognize very quickly with a lot of help from researchers, I work really closely with UCI as well on adolescent and young adult development with Dr. Beth Kaufman, is, I know it's going to shock you, but I created another dedicated court. So this one's for transitional age youth, a young adult court. And we're hoping this is exactly what happens. I now have these young people who unfortunately maybe didn't completely successfully come out of the juvenile system from the child welfare side or from the juvenile justice side and have got themselves entangled into some adult criminal conduct. Well, now we're going to transition into the next phase, our young adult court. I don't like this acronym because it's called YAC. But that is what is recognized when we talk about it across the country. So we're really trying to do it. It is a randomized trial study that we have actually launched here in Orange County. And so what we are doing for those transitional aged youth, 18 to 25, is continue with the care and services that Joanne and Doug are working with them on the juvenile side. And hopefully I'm able to scoop them up when they come into the adult side.
What are the most effective programs doing in terms of the prevention of commercial sexual exploitation of children?
It really is the child welfare system. You know, we know that the vast majority of these children, these victims, come from histories of abuse and neglect in their homes. And the original collaborative court, the original way that we take care of youth is our child welfare system. And the earlier that system can intervene in the child's life and the family's life. This is not about taking children away from their parents forever and ever. This is to support the family, strengthen the family ties, address the underlying issues that gave rise to that abuse and neglect, build an intact family, and with that, give them the foundation to never step foot in the Csec world. That's the prevention thing, and the more that system, you know, people talk about the child welfare system, and there's a lot of stereotypes and biases about that system, some justified without question, without a doubt. But to the extent that we can be conscious that that system is there to prevent the kind of abuse and neglect that we know gives rise to Csec. And really, you know, it becomes, you all know more than anybody, it becomes astronomically more difficult to deal with a victim once they've been caught in the clutches of a pimp. If we can strengthen that family right from the get-go, the greatest thing in the world was for you all to not have a single victim to ever have to support. And that's what we need to try to aim for.
It's wonderful because OCDE is here, and some of their presentations are about exactly that kind of resiliency in response to adverse childhood experiences. The next question with a lot of votes is can Grace Court address the school to prison pipeline?
Well, I think the Grace Court program works because we have the ability to provide more intensive services and attention to that particular participant, that victim. And as we know, I think it was 30%, 20 to 30% of our foster youth enter into that adult system and may even enter into Maria's YAC court, which is great because we're hoping that that court actually takes off and can give us some good information so that we can further develop that program to assist this vulnerable population, because that is the biggest population in our jails right now, is that 18 to 25-year-old population. So when we're talking about how Grace Court can perhaps stave off some of that prison to pipeline population, it is to keep on providing the services. So we have to keep on pushing forward and working with each of our participants. And the model that we're using right now, I think is, and I speak for myself, but I think based on our team and the presence that our team has and the impact that our team can have on that particular victim and the support services, and to make sure that, you know, if there's not a return to home, then there's at least a plan for transitional independent living that we try to really encourage and try to support. However they want to get there, you know, we just are there. The court will always be for those victims. So I think in order to be effective, we're doing that, and then hopefully that will keep them out of the foster youth system for very much longer, hopefully transition them into independent living, and then it keeps them away from that, I don't like that term, but the pipeline to prison that we see often with our foster youth.
Thank you so much. Are you seeing any trends in the youth in Grace Court who are immigrants or parents? Their parents are immigrants. How does this particular vulnerability affect child victims?
Since I was pre-Grace Court, I can't necessarily answer for Grace Court, but the population in general is this. In fact, I just dealt with it yesterday, involving a young man whose mother severely abused him 12 years ago, 10 years ago, was charged, convicted, and deported. Father then was subsequently convicted of a criminal offense and was deported. The child is 14, lives with grandparents. But the issues, the trauma that his life began with, exacerbated by the loss of his parents, is an aggravating factor that is making this particular case, in any case like that, extraordinarily difficult to deal with, to reach that youth and address his trauma in a way that will allow him to move forward in a fruitful way. It makes it just a lot tougher.
Can I just add to that? It also makes it very difficult for services because we cannot get the supportive services necessarily. And some of our participants on closer to 18 in Grace Court, we're really trying to beef up our job skill training and provide that for our victims. And it really does make it difficult to give full-fledged services to some of our kids.
Challenging. How long are services eligible? I think we kind of did this a little bit. What happens as they enter adulthood? And I think, Judge Hernandez, you did that well. Are all OC judges, prosecutors, and public defenders being trained on the trauma of human trafficking? If so, by who, and how can LA courts be trained?
It's a process. So the answer to that is a complete no. But I will tell you that trauma lens, that trauma-informed approach, victim-centered approach, is something, especially in our juvenile court, that we launched with very, very quickly. I will tell you, our juvenile justice probation side made sure that every single person who was touching our children in the hall, out in the field, had trauma training. Likewise, our child welfare, our social service folks, they are all trauma trained, cross-trained. Judicial officers, we brought them in too, because you also have to remember, and this just putting out there for everybody, you're going to have some vicarious trauma. So what was important for me when I was PJ at Juvie was I needed all of my court staff as well who were seeing this walk through their doors and seeing it every day as well, and the impact that it was having on them. So with respect to some of our other stakeholders, I can't speak to that as far as the public defender's office or the district attorney's office. I can tell you the folks that work directly with our Csec population through Grace Court and what have you, yes, because the trauma training is something that is significant, and to be able to have that trauma lens, not just with our Csec population, but to Doug's point, every child that is system involved has some significant either chronic or acute trauma that's going on in their lives.
A couple of really quick questions. Can we refer a foster child who's suspected of Csec to Grace Court? How?
Yes. The social services agency usually, they have a very good tool, and they usually identify, and then they will quickly refer. Some of the lawyers may, the bench officers may. It comes to us in a variety of ways.
In regard to legal representation, are there any private attorneys offering pro bono services to juvenile victims? Public Law Center, possibly?
We have Public Law Center for ancillary, like legal services. Yes.
Okay. Are there John schools available in Orange County? John schools, yeah.
I'm seeing Sergeant Rivales shaking his head in the negative. Is that correct? So no.
Okay. Are services mandated or voluntary through Grace Court?
They're voluntary for our victims, and then it depends on where the parent is in reunification with that particular victim. So they may be court-ordered through the parent.
Is there training available for foster parents to become trauma-informed and eligible?
And I look back to child welfare and social services, and they have an abundance of training, and they want their parents and anybody who's touching our kids to have, at some levels, trauma training. Right, Nicole? She's shaking her head, yes.
Yes, good job, Nicole. Nicole was one of the very first people to register for this conference. I just love our community connections. What are some major differences, this is our last question, when you compare Grace Court to Dream or Star Court?
The main difference is Star Court basically is just juvenile justice. Dream Court is just purely the child welfare cases. We have had actually conversations with the Dream Court judge in LA. She would like a court that's combined because she sees the benefits to having a combined court like we do in Orange County, but in Los Angeles County it just can't be done because of the number of cases that they have on their dockets. We are fortunate in Orange County in that our numbers are not huge. We have a good number of participants in Grace Court, but I have seen both courts in operation, and I do like the way Orange County has been set up because we are able to bring an entire team, everybody who is touching that particular victim, to the table to discuss everything that's going on, probation side, social services side, which you can't accomplish in Los Angeles County the way that Star Court and Dream Court are set up, because those are two different conversations going on about the same youth in two different realms.
That will be on the exam at the end of this. Can we thank our judges, please?